Hello, my darling, and welcome to today's story time. Today we return to Flames of the Storm, and in the background we have the sounds of a western saloon to help you fall asleep. And now, on with our story time. Sunbeam had been good to Mary Leeds. On the night that her father had been killed, several wealthy bad men had died intestate, and Sunbeam settled their estates without recourse to law. But the life of the border mining town palled upon her. She did not fit in somehow. The estimable Mrs. Porter had taken her into their home and had grown rather refined in her language due to the instructive criticism of Mary Leeds. "My," exclaimed Mrs. Porter. "Ever since Jim Porter flirted openly with a stick of dynamite, I've had to do everything except chew tobacco. But now, I reckon I've got to curry my fingernails, wear stockings, and say, 'Yes, sir,' to every hard-headed son of a rooster that comes after his laundry." "But," explained Mary, "you're a woman." "That's so," agreed Mrs. Porter dubiously. "I suppose I am. I've got them characteristics. I kind of wish you'd stay here in Sunbeam. Me and you get along sweet and pretty. But after you're gone, I'll be the only refined female in this whole town. Maybe I'll forget everything you learned me, and I'll start swearing like—" "I hope not," sighed Mary. "You have been lovely to me, Mrs. Porter. I don't know what I would have done without you, and—" Mrs. Porter lifted her homely face and looked closely at Mary, who was staring out the half-open window. The rumble of a series of blasts shook the ground, and from over on the street came the bumping and rattling of a heavy freight wagon. Mary Leeds was not beautiful, though not far from it. Her face was appealing in its delicate lines, and a pair of wistful blue eyes looked out into the world from below a tangle of soft brown hair. Mary turned and saw Mrs. Porter looking at her. "You didn't quite finish your statement, Mary," said Mrs. Porter softly. Mary's eyes switched back to the window, but she did not reply. "You kind of meant to say a man's name, didn't you?" "A man?" asked Mary, but Mary did not turn her head. "Yeah, a man," said Mrs. Porter. Skeeter Bill Sarge." Mary turned and looked straight at Mrs. Porter. "Skeeter Bill? Now why would I mention him?" Mrs. Porter turned back to her washtub and thoughtfully lifted a dripping garment. "I don't know why." She shook her head. "Of course he didn't do nothing for you," she added. Mary continued to stare out of the window. "Funny sort of feller," mused Mrs. Porter, "was Skeeter Bill. I remember that he killed Jeff Billings, 'cause Jeff lied to him, and Jeff had some laundry with me which wasn't paid for. But Skeeter paid for it. I offered it to him, but he wouldn't take it. Do you remember how he saved you and the preacher at the Poplar Springs after Tug Leeds and his gang had shot up the outfit to steal the horses? He brought you both back here and backed the preacher to clean up Sunbeam. And Tug Leeds lied to you and the preacher about Skeeter and made you think he was an awful bum. Do you remember that, do you? And then maybe you remember how Tug Leeds framed it to have the preacher hold church in his dang tonka-tonk to disgust both of ya, and how Skeeter Bill raised and with the whole gang and saved you from being stole by Leeds and his gang. Remember that some of that lousy outfit shot old Judge Territon through the window, and the old judge, with his dying muscles, pulled the trigger that sent Tug Leeds. And Judge Territon was your pa, and Tug Leeds was the man who had sent him to the penitentiary and stole his name. Remember all that, don't ya? Skeeter Bill was the man who engineered it all. Mary turned slowly and nodded dumbly. I know, she said. I owe him everything, Mrs. Porter. He had been awful good to my old daddy, they say. He saved my life, I think. But he said he was a horse thief, and you betcha he did, she responded. Honest. Whoopee. That gangling outlaw sure was honest. If he'd have gotten killed in that entertainment, they'd put up a monument to him. But as it is, I suppose some of these snake hunters would kill him on sight. Human nature is kinda like that, Mary. Folks that pack a sawed-off shotgun for you when you're alive will chip in to give you a fancy tombstone and shed tears over you when you're dead. Folks cuss me for wearing out their shirts on an old washboard. But I'll betcha if I died, they'd all chip in and put me up a tombstone, real finicky, with a marble angel humped over a washtub, looking at a marble shirt, and on it they'd engrave, not worn out, but near it. Mary Leeds laughed at Mrs. Porter's serious expression and her dejected position over the washboard as she held the dripping shirt in both hands. She gazed at the ceiling. If I go to heaven, continued Mrs. Porter, and they tell me that angels wear shirts, I'm sure going to tell them that I know a lot of preachers that have got the wrong dope on things down here. Mrs. Porter slapped the shirt back into the sudsy water and sank down into a broken back chair. Ah, I'm sick of it all. So I am. Scrub, scrub, scrub all the time, except when I'm riding sign on a flat iron. Miners bring in their flannel shirts so danged dirty that you can't wash them. You have to cultivate them. Their socks has been so worn so long that I have to picket them out instead of hanging them on the line. Filler brought me 6 suits of underclothes last week, and I let them fall off the table. Know what they done? 3 suits broke all, and the other 3 was so badly cracked that he made me pay for them. I tell you, I'm sick of it. How can I get refined under them conditions, I ask you? Mrs. Porter gathered up her apron in both hands and buried her face within its damp folds. Her shoulders shook with suppressed emotion. Mary went to her quickly and threw both arms around her shoulder. Oh, I'm so sorry. It is too hard. Do you really have to stay here, Mrs. Porter? Couldn't you live just as well in some other town? I suppose so. Mrs. Porter's voice was muffled. Goodness knows. There ain't many towns where men don't get their shirts dirty, she added. I didn't mean that, explained Mary softly. Perhaps you could get into something else. Suppose you go back east with me. Mrs. Porter lifted her head quickly and stared wide-eyed at Mary. Go east with you? Where there are lots of folks and lots of shirts, supplied Mrs. Porter. Lord bless you, child. I ain't got but $80 to my name. I have, said Mary. I have enough for us both. Mrs. Porter shifted her eyes and looked around the room. There was nothing attractive about the rough shack interior. Outside, a mule skinner spoke in the only language known to mules, and a heavy wagon lurched past through the dust. Mrs. Porter shoved her hair back from her face and got slowly to her feet. She lifted up the sodden shirt and slapped it against the washboard. This here shirt belongs to Doc Sykes, the coroner. Kinda prophetic-like, so it is, 'cause I've told him that he was the last person I ever expected to do business with. Give me room to ring, young woman, 'cause I'm sure gonna wind up my career in a big splash. You sure got something wished onto you when you issued an invite to me to go where men change their shirts once per week. Ooh-wee. Mary Leeds laughed joyously and gave Mrs. Porter plenty of room for her last appearance. as a laundress in a mining camp. While Mary Leeds and Mrs. Porter prepared to leave Sunbeam, and while Skeeter Bill Sarge smoked innumerable cigarettes and waited for the sheriff to take him to the penitentiary at Red Lodge, a disgruntled crew of cowboys and paid gunmen loafed around the Lazy H Ranch. It had developed that Cleve Hart was not the sole owner of the Lazy H, and that the other owners, who were Eastern capitalists, were disgruntled over their investment. They ordered an immediate sale of the property and the discharge of all employees forthwith. Nick Cales had sold his services to Cleve Hart without any agreement from the other owners, with the result that he was forced to look forward to about 2 weeks' pay at the rate of $40 a month, instead of the generous bonus due him as a professional gunman. Dutch Van Cleve, a protege of Nick Cales, was also a bit disgruntled over the outcome. The rest of the remaining cowpunchers, Red Bowen, Swede Sorensen, Roper Bates, and Boots Orson, faced a lean year, as none of them saved more than tobacco money out of their monthly salary. The killing of Cleve Hart and the arrest and conviction of Skeeter Bill had quieted things to some extent, but it was only an armed truce. Cowboys rode deadlines and managed to keep the sheep within a well-defined area, but the cattlemen knew that an adverse court decision would wipe out deadlines, and with it, the cattle business. Swede Sorensen had just ridden in from Crescent City, bringing the mail, and among it was a letter for Nick Cales, postmarked from the town of Wheeler. Cales looked it over gloomily and put it unopened into his pocket. He exchanged a word or two with Dutch Van Cleve aside, and a little later they both approached Roper Bates, a saturnine, narrow between the eyes, sort of a puncher. "Can you read?" queried Cales. "Well," grinned Roper, "I ain't no professional reader, as you might say, but I know some of the alphabet. You know how to keep your mouth shut, don't you?" "Now," said Roper seriously, "you're guessing me dead center. Shoot the piece, Cales." Cales took out the letter and handed it to Roper, who looked at it curiously. "It ain't never been opened," he remarked. "Me and Dutch can't read," explained Cales. "We're asking you to decipher it for us, okay?" Roper took out the letter and laboriously spelled out the pencil-written message. "It says," began Roper, "Dear Nick, all set for a big one on Thursday the 18th. Make it look good. Number 16. It's there about 9 o'clock. Burn this up right away. Very truly yours, Wheat." Roper finished and looked up at Cales, who was staring intently at him. "What's the idea?" queried Roper seriously. Cales watched Roper's face closely for several seconds and then took the letter from him. He touched a lighted match to one corner of the letter and envelope and watched them burn to a flimsy cinder. "You know something now," said Cales meaningfully. "There ain't no use telling you to keep your mouth shut." "Ah," grunted Roper, "you make me tired. If the deal's any good, I want in on it." Cales and Dutch exchanged glances. Dutch was long of face, crooked of nose, and with a pair of round eyes which seemed to film over instead of blinking. "What you think, Dutch?" queried Cales. "All right," nodded Dutch. "I don't care." "What about the rest?" asked Cales. "Red, Swede, Boots? This job is big enough for all." "All square," declared Roper. "All square and all broke. Put it up to 'em, Cales." The three men drifted down to the bunkhouse, where the other three were playing 7-Up, and Cales lost no time in feeling out the other cowboys. "What are you fellers going to do?" asked Cales. "She's a long way to the next range." Red growled disgustedly. "That's the worst of it. I'm broke, flat." "You ain't got nothing on me," grunted Swede. "I don't even own the saddle I'm riding." Boots Orson queried next. "What's the answer to your question, Kales?" He was a trifle more intelligent than the rest, and felt that Kale's question was not idle curiosity. "A certain job," stated Kales bluntly. "It might mean a big stake, or it might mean the penitentiary. Takes a lot of guts." "You're talking," reminded Orson softly. "Am I?" Kale's eyes swept the circle of cowboys, but read only interest in their faces. "You show us," said Red slowly, spacing his words widely. "I'm game." "That's right," breathed Swede. "Shoot." Kales asked, "Did you ever hear of Sunbeam?" "Yeah," nodded Swede. "Mining town, about 50 miles from Wheeler." "It's a gold mine in town," said Kales, as if disputing Swede. "A lot of the yaller stuff shipped out there, but nobody knows when." "There ain't a mind reader among us," grinned Red. "That part's all fixed," explained Kales. He nodded to Roper. "He read us the letter." "I read the letter," agreed Roper. He looked up from the manufacture of the cigarette. "Didn't fix nothing for me." Kales urged, "Let me tell you about the letter. The feller who wrote it is Pat Wheat, and an old bunkie of mine. He works for the express company as a shotgun messenger. That's how he knows things, I reckon. Me and him have been working for a big stake, and he knows I was here, so he tips me off. Pat will be riding shotgun on this shipment, and she's a cinch that will crack out of here with a lot of dinero." "Hold up the train?" queried Red. "You're right," he responded. "Cut off the baggage car and take it a few miles. Won't have nobody to handle except the engine crew. Pat'll take care of the messenger." Roper grinned joyously. "We can flag her down just short of the S Bridge, cut off the money car, and run down to the mouth of San Gregorio Canyon. She's a dinger of a place to make a great getaway. Have the horses planted there," he continued, "and we can ride the rocky bottom of that dry creek for a mile. Never leave a track." "How about the rest of the train?" queried Boots. "There's 6 of us. Passengers pack, money, and jewelry." Kales nodded slowly and stared at the ceiling for a while before he said, "Yeah, that might be a good scheme at that. We'll cut the telegraph wire. It won't be a lot of passengers, but it might pay to do it. If it was a regular mainline train with sleepers, I'd say it wouldn't pay. But on a branch line like this, it's a cinch to pile out or into them old cars." "When do we get action?" queried Roper. "Did that letter say Thursday?" "It did," nodded Kales. "And this is Tuesday. We'll work out the details later." Red yawned. "Can't come too soon to suit me. Since Cleve Hart got bumped off, it's been kind of slow around here." "Hart was a fool," declared Kales. Red laughed. "Any old time you start monkeying with women, you're a fool." He continued, "Do you think that's why he got his? It's a cinch. He thought he'd run a blazer on that shepherd and take his woman, but he got his shirt filled with buckshot." Boots asked, "Where'd this Sarge person figure into the deal anyway?" Boots had been with the sheriff when they arrested Skeeter Bill. Kales grinned, showing some very bad teeth. "Sarge never shot Hart. I know a few things about that long night, you betcha. He's a pistol fighter, Sarge is, and a good shot. Do you think he'd pick up a shotgun when he had a loaded 6-gun in his holster?" He continued, "Sarge pistol whipped Sunbeam Town, so they tell me, and pulled out without a scratch. I don't care what he's doing down here, unless he hired out his gun to the sheep outfits." Roper asked, "Do you reckon the woman killed Hart?" "She sure did, partner." Kales was emphatic. mused Roper. He had seen Mrs. Kirk, and Roper was not overloaded with scruples. Friel's scared, observed Swede. He ain't made no move to take Sarge to the penitentiary yet. Red responded. Them boys from the Tin Cup outfit swore they'd hang Sarge if they got a chance, and Friel ain't taking no chances. They're sore at the judge for not hanging Sarge. Course, the sheep are closer to the Tin Cup than to any of the other outfits, and if the law decides in favor of the sheep, Blue-E, they'll swarm plumb into the Tin Cup range. Course, the law only give 'em an even break with the cattle, but the law don't stop to figure that cattle can't live on an even break with sheep. Well, after that sermon, stated Roper piously, the choir will rise and sing. What do we care what the sheep do in Moon Valley? We're leaving here, right? And with freight all paid, added Cales, grinning. Tomorrow, we all pull out, okay? Me and Dutch will pull out from Crescent City after we've planted the fact that we're leaving for good. We'll spring it that Roper and Swede left over Table Rock Pass today. Maybe Red and Boots better stay here at the ranch. Might look bad if we all drifted at the same time, right? And suppose we all meet in San Gregorio Canyon, down near the mouth of it, about dark on Thursday. Me and Dutch will have things framed, wires cut and all that. The rest of the gang nodded in agreement, except Roper, who said, Let Boots pull out the Swede, and I'll stay here. I owe a few dollars in Crescent City, and I might want to come back here someday. I'll ride down with you and Dutch, and then come back here. Well, that's all right, grunted Cales. Fix it any old way you want to. And thus are honest men drawn into evil paths through the need of a few dollars. But the question still remains, who is an honest man? Who is broke, with easy money in sight? And this, my darling, ends our story time for today. As always, I hope that you have very sweet and creepy dreams.